Hello, 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 everybody. Tyler James here, and we've got a special interview for you all today. My guest is an Eisner and Ignatz award-winning cartoonist. His books include The Plain Jane, Street Angel, Aphrodisiac, and Notebook Drawings. He's also the co-creator of YouTube's Cartoonist Kayfabe comics channel. He's an instructor at the School of Visual Arts, and his stunning and innovative blacklight comic with fluorescent ink, OCTOBRIANA 1976, has already raised $64,000 plus on Kickstarter, with 2 more weeks to go left in the launch. And so I'm excited that he's taken a little bit of time to talk to the ComixLaunch audience. Welcome to ComixLaunch, Jim Rugg. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Tyler. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you, taking the time to chat with us. And I want to just dive right into this because I think this is going to be a great discussion. It's exciting to see how well your project is doing. But you're someone that's been in this game for a while now, right? And one of the questions that people ask me sometimes, and usually it's from creators that have started to have some wins and some success, but they also realize how much struggle there is and how much obstacles they overcome to achieve a certain amount of success. And they sort of ask, how do you keep this up? How do you keep going? How do you keep it fresh? And for me, one of the things that keeps me going is looking for either new mountains to climb or just getting really obsessed with pushing the envelope and making really beautiful books. And I'm wondering, what is it that's keeping you going? And to some extent has the ability of just, taking a big creative leap with this new comic been, one of those things that's allowed you to just keep at this and keep passionate about this medium?
Yeah, you sum it up very well, Tyler. My answer is going to sound a lot like what you said. It's that obsession of trying to make cool new books, and I do some other things. I do drawings and art and illustration and things, but my focus is comics, all things being equal. That's what I love. Mm-hmm. And so it's just finding a story, a passion, that I'm passionate about, or something different. In this case, the blacklight comic itself, that format's different. So then it was like, I had the idea for the blacklight comic. I needed to find a story that fit that really well. So that's basically it. I love a lot of comics. Anyone that watches Cartoonist Kayfabe knows I tend to read all kinds of different things and pull inspiration from those. And so whether it's underground comics or indie comics or, Marvel and DC that I grew up with, I want to do all this stuff. Yeah. So I have notebooks full of ideas of everything running that gamut from mainstream Marvel DC style stories to very alternative indie stuff. And I make zines and things with some of those more indie ideas, but it's just about making stuff. I bind hardcover books by hand, is an extension of that making kind of thing. And I don't know what it is. It's something in my brain. I started a podcast because I listened to podcasts while I worked, and pretty soon I kind of wanted to try one. So that's a lot of what guides me, is just having that impulse of let's make something cool. And in the case of the blacklight comic, I did a blacklight screen print several years ago. And when I got it back from the printer, I was like, this is amazing. I love these colors. Yeah, that's the print. And so I was so excited by how it looked. I thought this would make a perfect comic, this color palette. And I went looking for one and didn't find it. And so that's the perfect thing for me, is I want there to be a blacklight comic book. I don't see one. Great. I'm going to try to make one myself.
Yeah. So for those of us that have never haven't run across you at a convention, haven't seen this actual, print, obviously, just can you talk a little bit about the blacklight and fluorescent ink effect that maybe isn't 100% translated on the Kickstarter page here?
Yeah, the fluorescent inks have a certain quality that I'm going to call it charging. It's phosphorescent. And what happens is whenever they're exposed to light, they almost take on a glowing effect. And then the black light itself kind of amplifies that. So, if you have a black light and you put one of these prints under it or in a room with it, it almost glows, in what is otherwise a dark room. And it's just this really cool effect. But, if you don't have a black light, I think it's equally striking. That's what really stood out to me, was just seeing these super bright colors in person. And you can't really do them on a screen, as you mentioned. That fluorescent effect, I don't know, it's like photochemical or something. It's a little above my pay grade as a cartoonist, but it looks amazing in just regular light as well, because it is so bright. And I can't tell you exactly why they work that way, but I can't, just the response to them personally and to people that I've shown in person, it's stunning. It's very dramatic to see these things in person. Trying to capture that on screen has been a challenge.
Yeah.
But, I think a lot of people have seen blacklight prints. They're kind of familiar with that idea. You've certainly seen fluorescent, ink and paint and colors out in the real world. So I hope it's not too hard for people to picture what this would look like. But I've described it as it'll be the best looking comic ever in terms of these colors just, like burning themselves into your retinas because they are so bright and vivid.
Yeah. So, that original blacklight fluorescent ink print that you created, I'm assuming you've sold a few of those at conventions, and that print did okay for you, and that may have contributed to like the idea that maybe there might be a market for something like that. Is that a fair assumption?
It did very well. Yeah. I mean, we didn't do that many of those prints and they sold out virtually instantly.
Yeah.
And so we're reprinting them for this Kickstarter. It's one of the rewards and it's part of the story of this book. It really is kind of the very beginning of when I got the idea of I need to do this in a comic book format. It's because of that print. And definitely there's been a strong response to it. And it will pop up, online now and then. People will post a picture of it on Instagram or something, and you'll see people get excited about it. So it's something that I am happy to bring back into print. And it's something that people have expressed a lot of interest in. So, it's a little bit more of a commitment than making a mini comic or something like that. And, this Kickstarter really allows me to have some fun with it. I'm doing a series of screen prints, blacklight screen prints as part of this Kickstarter, 3 in all. So, it's a chance to do something fun and something that really will look cool.
Yeah. And, I think for a lot of creators, that sort of thing is very important. There's a book that we did for Comics Tribe called Sync, and one of the reasons why it was like the easiest book for me to greenlight was because about 2 years before I think there was even a script, artist Alex Cormack had drawn like the main character, and it was just like a vigilante looking dude with a fox mask and a bloody shovel. And I, hanging out and tabling near Alex and just seeing him, he put up a few of those prints for sale, and people are buying this print from a character that they've never heard of, that doesn't exist other than this image. And, just seeing the market react to that, very, very clear. Okay, there's something here just with a visual or with a style or a format. But what I think was interesting is that you had the concept like the high concept of the product, but you didn't have a story to go with it. And so what was the process to go, okay, let's do a full comic in this style, but all right, now I need a story. How did that come about?
The concept of the production was the start, as you said. And I'm very close friends with Chris Pitzer from Ad House Books. I've done several books and graphic novels and kind of interesting print projects with him. His background is in print. So anytime I have one of these ideas and it's kind of new or I'm not 100% sure it will work, he's the first person I talk to. And whenever I mentioned the plans, what I had in mind to produce this, he thought, yes, it would work, and he'd be interested in publishing it. And so then it was time to find a story. And, my first thought is it should be in the 70s, because when I think of blacklight posters, I think of 70s. And then the great part is it's like head shops and underground comics, like it all sort of, that part all fits. And I had written a couple of different stories. One was with a barbarian character who that print is, basically the character from that print. And I wasn't totally happy with that story. And OCTOBRIANA is based on a character in a real book that came out in 1971. And I'm always I found it in a compilation of weird comics by Paul Gravett. And so I saw it and I tracked down a copy. And when I started reading OCTOBRIANA and thinking about the blacklight and 70s story I was looking for, it all sort of fit together, because she's this underground Russian superhero that's inspired by 60s American superheroes. So, I love superheroes. I grew up reading those. And she's a public domain character. And it just all kind of seemed like a good fit. I thought if the American underground cartoonists got hold of this in the 70s, this book, when it was published, they would do something with this character almost as a show of solidarity to their Russian counterparts that were making this stuff as underground comics in Russia. That story is not totally true. That book is a hoax. but it's a really compelling story. And the character has gone on to appear in other comics. You know, a lot of other cartoonists have seen OCTOBRIANA and done some version of her themselves. Like Brian Talbot and Luther Arkwright is probably the best known example. And I just love that whole thing. You know, I like this. It's a different way to make a world, you know, and that original author really did kind of create this world around this fictitious character and then gave it to the world to play with. And story-wise, it's kind of inspired by Mike Mignola's Amazing Screw-On Head, which is a self-contained story that I really enjoyed when it came out and still enjoy it. But it's this self-contained story that's funny but action-packed. That was kind of what I was going for a story. And I wrote it on index cards. My first note or my first scene was OCTOBRIANA races away from a mushroom cloud on a Russian military motorcycle. And then I start building it out from there, you know? So it was like, this was going to be an art comic. You know, I needed a story, a structure for it, but I also knew like I wanted these big, cool moments in it visually. And so, you know, kind of organically developed. And the story itself, I wrote probably in about 2 days, you know, very quickly. Once I started looking this direction, it just seemed to, you know, it just came to me really. And so once I had the story structure down, I liked it. I thought there was a lot of room for cool art, and I took off from there.
Yeah, yeah, and well, that mushroom cloud probably can explain the black light and the fluorescent, right? Yeah, I love that, and you know, I think there's a lot of ways to paths to get to, you know, a finished product. Sometimes it's you come up with a cool title. Sometimes it's a genre or an idea that you want to play with. Sometimes it's a format. And so, you know, it can be tough to sort of teach this stuff, but that is something that you do as you know, for the Art Institute, right? You also do some instruction. What kind of topics and things do you focus on with your work as a teacher?
I work at the School of Visual Arts in their Visual Narrative Master's program. And so I teach 2 classes there, one in the fall on visual storytelling. And we look at a lot of different media and kind of identify, you know, what these different choices mean to an audience that's watching or reading, you know, the story. And so that's one half of it. And then in the spring, I teach a digital short story class where students conceive of and execute an entire short story in 15 weeks. Based, you know, a lot on what we go over in the fall with that visual storytelling class. So, you know, it's in some ways it's foundational storytelling, even though it's kind of advanced and complex, but it's what we see every day, you know, as consumers, whether it's television commercials, movies, movie trailers, you know, comics, graphic novels, video games, they all have a certain language that allows us to understand what we're seeing and interpret it more or less consistently, you know, as an audience. Yeah. And so that's generally what I teach is that idea of, in a lot of ways, it's clarity. You know, it's how do you communicate using images or images and text.
Yeah, awesome. You know, there's a quote by author Sally Hogshead who says, "Different is better than better." I'm wondering what you think of that quote, and you know whether because it seems like you actually are attracted to sort of stuff that's different, that's out there. But at the same time, as a instructor of students, many of whom are raw and young, you know, there does have to be a balance between unique style and skill, and you know, sometimes. And so I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I one of the things that attracts me to comics is that there aren't a lot of rules. You know, for a long time, there was no academic component. And so you would see these innovative cartoonists doing radical stuff, and then other people would adopt it. But it was really a playground of like, you could do almost anything, say, compared to film, where you're dependent on people believing in what you're trying to make to give you money. With comics, you could sort of like freely go out and make something the world had never seen. And that always appealed to me. So I don't have a lot of storytelling rules. Like my main rules are, 1, don't be boring. And then 2, don't be confusing. Although there are exceptions to that. If you're doing maybe a mystery story, for example, being a little confusing might be part of it. So, you know, you're right. I would rather see something different than something that may be of higher quality, but also similar to stories I've already seen. And that's, you know, that's somewhat personal. I think readers are very different in what they want. But I love the different stuff. You know, that's what I'm looking for. Like, show me a comic I haven't seen before. Show me an art style I haven't seen before. And maybe it's because I'm a maker, and so I draw inspiration from, you know, give me something different. Yeah. But I do value that a lot.
Yeah, and I was watching on your Kayfabe channel, just reviewing an old or the Jim Lee X-Men #1. Just pulled that up. I'm someone that sort of, I probably read my first comic when I was 3 or 4, but it was that sort of '90s era envelope pushing. Just let's break a ton of rules, and then also hit comics with an explosion in the transformation from traditional coloring to digital coloring, and let's up the paper stocks and just get nuts with cover, with printings and enhancements and all that stuff. And as a teenager and as a kid, I ate all that stuff up. And as a publisher now, fast forward several decades, like I'm actually really fired up about doing cool stuff with the medium and with the production values as well. So it's interesting how these things come full circle.
And I think what you just described, when you're making a comic, it's not like it has to be one thing. It doesn't have to be different or better. Production values can factor in, like I always describe it as you're spinning a lot of these plates. And it's tough, depending on how many people are working on it. It can be a lot of things to sort of keep your eyes on, make sure the design's good, make sure the production's good, make sure the story works. Like there are a lot of these elements, but also the successful comic can bring all of those things to the table. Yeah. You can have great production value and a great story. It's not, it's not a situation of sacrificing because you have to prioritize one over the other. And I think the best comics do a good job of balancing that out and really, sticking the landing, so to speak, and nailing several of those qualities. And again, I think the audience, what they want out of a comic varies from reader to reader too, in terms of what they value. In some cases, you might be going to comics for escapism, and in a way, you want that comfort food. You want that light lifting. It's almost like a sitcom on television or something. You may not want to think too hard that night whenever you're reading after a hard day. So I think there are comics for a variety of people that are looking for different things out of a comic.
Yeah. Talk to me about the YouTube channel. Because I know you have a lot of fans, and I'm assuming that a big part of the success of this latest launch is being powered by fans that have gotten a ton of value from what you've been creating on your YouTube channel. But tell, for those of us that are new to it, tell us what it's all about, and
Yeah, it's Cartoonist Kayfabe, and I do it with another Pittsburgh cartoonist, Ed Piskor of X-Men Grand Design and Hip Hop Family Tree, are probably his two biggest titles. We got together about a year and a half ago to do the YouTube channel. I've known Ed for about 20 years. As a comics maker, we would travel to conventions together. We would talk comics. We would read each other's comics, ahead of time to give notes and things. And so we were at a show in Baltimore a year and a half ago, and Ed mentioned, what about doing a YouTube channel? Because we had done a podcast together in the past, and it sounded like a great idea. Any chance to work with Ed is a good thing. To work with anybody talented is a good thing in my mind. So we start up the YouTube channel, and I would describe it as, it's just, we love comics in a lot of ways, as makers, as readers, as collectors and fans. And so it is an outlet for us to just talk about the comics we love, the cartoonists we love. We interview cartoonists and publishers and people around comics. We'll take a comic and we'll just kind of go through it page by page and talk about what we see as cartoonists. We have done a bunch of Wizard magazines looking at like 90s comics history, which is when both of us really got into reading comics and, with an eye towards making them. And so it's really a celebration of comics and what we love. We sign off with read more comics, and we have built a really great community around that. It's mostly positive, again, things that we love. I always say I have more comics that I want to read than I will be able to get to in a lifetime. So those are the ones I'm going to focus on, the ones that I want to spend time with, prepping shows and episodes. And the community has been kind of a surprise, because they now make things. And, there's a fan group on Facebook where they're sharing their own comics. We hear from a lot of cartoonists that enjoy watching the show, which has led to some of the interviews that we've done. Sometimes it's people who have reached out and said, hey, I love this episode. And we're like, well, come on and let's talk about your comics. So it's really a little bit organic, but built around that idea of like, comics are our lives. Let's share some of what we've found that we think is interesting, or cartoonists that we think maybe other people would like, maybe people that have slipped under the radar a little bit. Let's highlight some of this stuff that we think's great.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, it's clear you've put out a lot of content since starting, less than a year ago, right?
About a year and a half.
About a year. Okay. So about a year and a half. What's sort of been your update schedule? Is it something that you're doing every day, or
not quite every day? We probably do about 4 or 5 episodes a week.
Yeah.
And we do a variety. We do a live show each week where we kind of talk about what we've done that week, maybe what we've read or watched, and the work that we're doing. We're both working cartoonists. Yeah. We do mailbags where people send us the comics they make or doubles that they kind of want us to talk about. Sometimes it's something obscure and it'll be like, I think Stump Jim and Ed, Yeah.
Right.
And again, we do, the interviews. We usually do a big show on Sunday, which started out, it was a lot of the Wizard magazines, like a month by month going through the 90s. Lately, it's been a lot of interviews with creators, including, Mark Miller, Gary Groth, publisher of Fantagraphics, just went up. I'm blanking because we've talked to so many people. It is a pretty aggressive schedule. We tend to record, we take one day and we just record as much as we can on that day, usually built around the interview. And then, some books that we have ready to go and talk about. And then we spend the week, editing those and sharing those. And I don't know, man, so far so good. The response has been positive and it's been a real energizing experience for me personally. And it's kind of great because you talk everybody that loves comics, I think, has the experience of finding other comics fans and how great it is to like talk about the comics you love, but also hear their perspective on those comics, because it can be a way to add appreciation to the books that you love already. When somebody else points out, hey, did you notice this part? Or, my favorite part is this other scene. And so it's been really invigorating that way. But also, I'm often looking at comics to try to solve the problems in my own comics making. Mm-hmm. And, I always say, like, I'm self-taught as a cartoonist. And so this is an extension, in a way, it's my own master's course of like, let me bring this up, because it's something I'm trying to figure out or work out or understand why this cartoonist did this or that choice. And sometimes Ed has an answer, or sometimes Ed has a different perspective on it. Or sometimes, a commentator at home can fill in gaps that we have. So, it's a little bit selfish, but it does keep me motivated. And like I said, the response has been surprising. In the beginning, I was just worried about the technical part. How do we, make it sound okay or look okay? Yeah. And I didn't think about what the audience reaction might be like. And we started going to conventions after we did the channel, and you'd see people in our t-shirts, which was awesome. And, people started coming up and telling us about their experience. And I just hadn't thought about it that much. But podcasters have that similar thing where you almost feel like these hosts of your favorite podcast. And I think that a lot of people have had that experience with us. And it's almost like when I first found comic book stores, and it was like, these are my, there are other people that are like me. I'm not the weirdo last person on earth. Like we all like this stuff. And I think a lot of people have found that with our channel.
Yeah. Yeah. It's especially now where conventions sort of fill that gap for most cartoonists who are used to being introverts / hermits and head down focus. Conventions provide that time to get around people like this. Well, right now that's something that isn't an option. But these sort of channels allow us to stay connected with the wider world. And I also, one thing I do love about your show is that it is focused largely on positive stuff. I mean, you guys aren't afraid to be critical of work or point out why something works or why something doesn't work. But I have sort of feared that there is a portion of the upcoming next generation of cartoonists and creators that is learning the lesson that the way you build a name and be successful is by picking fights and trashing stuff that you don't like. And that's the key to becoming comics. And then we'll figure out the comic later, but let's build a big angry mob, trashing what we don't like. And I am not a fan of that, but just love to hear your thoughts.
I agree with you. I think if you look into that, I do a lot for my own mental health, and I think that is just a recipe for disaster personally, really dwelling on the stuff you don't like and putting that negative out there. And I also wonder, we have access to everything now. You know, I mean, like whatever comic you're looking for, I would hear about some cartoonist when I was a kid and be like, all right, I need to track down, you know, some Jack Kirby comics or Robert Crumb or, you know, whatever the comic was. And it would take me sometimes years. It took me 3 years to put together a set of Frank Miller's Ronin whenever I was a kid, because it would be, you know, maybe one convention a year that I would get to, you know, and dig around for it. So now if you're looking for Ronin or whatever the comic is, you can usually find it within a minute or two. And with that in mind, it's kind of like you can look at whatever you want. So are you going to choose to look at something that you hate or that you think is terrible? Like, why? I just don't understand. I just think life is so short. Why is that how you're going to spend your time? And hopefully people, you know, if that's what they grew up with, and then they see our channel, go, well, there are alternatives, you know, maybe I'm going to go read the comic that I like and that makes me feel good and happy. We did about 2 weeks on Bill Watterson, Calvin and Hobbes comics. And so that means like reading interviews, reading comics, you know, prepping to talk about them, pulling out like highlights that we want to show off. And so I was reading Calvin and Hobbes before I would go to bed for like 2 weeks. I swear it would increase the everybody's mental health if that were like the required reading at night, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, who knows what the answer is to life and how anybody should do anything. But this is how I'm choosing to do it. And I think it helps me appreciate a lot of stuff and, you know, feel better most of the time. So hopefully somebody watching, you know, same deal, man, go read Calvin and Hobbes. If you're not feeling very good, this is the comics recipe to maybe snap out of it or turn your day around.
Yeah. Now, as someone that now has an audience with on the YouTube channel, have you been doing anything different or trying to use the YouTube channel to like, how are you approaching the YouTube channel when you have a big launch that's going on live? I know creators that build an audience or do things for an audience, getting that balance between, hey, I've got this really important thing that I'm passionate about that I want everybody to know about, versus I don't want to all of a sudden become an infomercial. How have you got that that balance down for your project?
Well, we do have we post links and things like that. So they're very easy to find. Like we'll pin a comment with links. Ed has a Patreon for his new comic, Red Room. I have my Kickstarter for OCTOBRIANA. So we post those links in places that we think are easy for people to find. That means under every video that we post, you'll see those. That's pretty unintrusive, I think, but easy to find. We mention them, you know, at the top and at the end of each show, as I think most podcasts and videos will often do their plugs. Our plugs happen to be for our own comics instead of, I don't know, you know, I don't even know what the standards are anymore on podcasts, but
Audible. Yeah.
Yeah. Omaha Steaks or something like that. You know, so we do 20 seconds or 30 seconds plugs on our shows just to let everybody know what's going on. And then our weekly show is definitely more focused on specifically what we've done that week or what we're doing. So we'll spend a little bit more time there. Especially if something has come up that week, you know, with Kickstarters, you end up rolling out things like stretch goals or, you know, various updates. So we may talk about those. And then I've done a couple of videos specifically about OCTOBRIANA 1976. One is about the original book, which is very much in line with what Cartoonist Kayfabe does, you know, find some book that we want to talk about. In this case, it was OCTOBRIANA and the Russian Underground. We do process videos from time to time where we're showing off artwork or showing off techniques or tools. So I've done a little bit of a process, showing some of the OCTOBRIANA process that I went through to make the book and showing off some of the original art from that process. So, you know, that's a dedicated episode. People can choose to watch that or not watch it. But yeah, that's been most of it, you know. And then additionally, I do a lot of outreach outside of Cartoonist Kayfabe, you know, reaching out to different news outlets or columnists or websites or, you know, bloggers, social media people that I think they would be interested or their audience would be interested. Pretty standard stuff, I think, for Kickstarter, but a little bit outside of the Cartoonist Kayfabe platform.
Yeah. So very cool. And I think that's striking a good balance. And honestly, you know, fans know that you are putting a lot of time and effort into this stuff. And so when you got something that you're putting out into the world that they can actually go and buy after receiving lots and lots of free content, you know, I don't think any creator should really feel too bad about giving them that opportunity.
And creators do, you know, I mean, I'm sure you've witnessed this at conventions where people come up and they ask a creator about the book or what's this about. And and sometimes we kind of like, sink into our shell a little bit and fold up and maybe aren't comfortable talking about our own work. I had that problem early on. I've been doing this for 20 years. You mentioned I've been doing this for a while, and that was me in the beginning. But I've learned, I don't want to stand up and say, this is the greatest comic ever, buy it. Like that hype seems insincere, and who can measure that? But
you will say it's the most beautiful, best looking comic ever. So obviously you've gotten over that a little bit.
I have, especially for this one, because I do believe, like visually it's going to be striking, mostly due to production, whether, beyond like art styles and stories. But the thing that I've tried to do is learn to describe the project clearly, to explain what the story is, the same way a trailer for something would, or if you were telling your friend about something that you had just watched or read that you enjoyed, how would you explain it? And I think like the more clear you can describe the thing beyond, hyperbole, but just a description of the project, then people can decide whether that speaks to them or sounds like something they would like. And so, I don't have a problem doing that at all. I mean, outside of my own work, that's what we do on Cartoonist Kayfabe is how clearly can you describe X-Men #1? What made this successful? What do you see in Jim Lee's art here? So I think you can kind of apply that same approach to your own stories, your own, whatever you're making. And I've tried to do that over years. And, that's what I would tell cartoonists that maybe have trouble or don't feel comfortable putting their work out there or promoting their work is you're doing people a favor. If you're doing a book that I'm interested in, I want to know about it. Please promote it. Please make it clear what it is that you've made, because there's so many things that look good to me that I find out about when I can't do anything. They're sold out or it's years later. And it's like, how did I miss this when it came out? I think we've all experienced that part. So that's part of how I overcome whatever trepidation I have about promoting myself and my work is like, some people want this and it's up to me to be the advocate for it. I'm not paying a publicist to do it. So I need to do it, be a good publicist for yourself. I
don't think being overly promotional actually exists in most of our worlds, just considering like Geico spends $1 billion a year, and
that's a great point.
Most people don't hate the Geico lizard, and most creators out there aren't doing any any infinitesimal fraction of that. We don't have the bandwidth to be in people's faces at the same level, and yet we think, 3 tweets today, is that gonna be too much?
People are gonna hate me.
So this was your first Kickstarter, right? Have you been a part of other Kickstarters or crowdfunding efforts in the past, or is this a new thing for you?
This is really my first one. I've done little things for other people, a pinup or like I designed a book that went through Kickstarter, but I did not do, any of the Kickstarter work or heavy lifting. So this is my first one.
Awesome. Well, obviously it's absolutely crushing it. While we've been on the air, you've crossed the $65,000 watermark, and you've got more than 2 weeks to go. I will say, 1,300 plus backers. Looks like you're on track for 2,000 plus. That's going to be a big fulfillment project. What are you doing to prep so that this doesn't completely take over / ruin your life when it's time to deliver?
Yeah, that's a good question. My wife is a teacher, and I teach fall and spring a little bit. So, I timed this to be in the summer. I expect to have everything back in July for fulfillment, which will give me some time to just kind of focus on that. I have talked to some fulfillment companies, and so that may be a route that I go, or maybe a partial route that I go, depending on, what I think we can handle. My wife is extremely organized and says, I expect her to kind of help me a lot in the fulfillment side of it. Yeah. So we'll see. I don't have that many, most of what I have are flat pieces. I did price out all of the shipping supplies that I would need personally, calculating shipping costs and things. So I think it's probably doable. One way or the other, it's going to get done. Yeah. I hope that I can do it without losing my mind. And so far I'm optimistic of that. And, one thing I've been thinking about with fulfillment is, rather than going with a fulfillment company, is if necessary, maybe hiring a few local people and friends, family, whatever, for a couple of days work to help out on that front.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I will say, you add one person to your team, it's going to cut the workload by about 50% easy, 50 to 60% easy. You add 3 people, it's by 90% in terms of total time. But I want to share this because there's another creator. I'm not sure if it's public, so I don't want to call him out or use specifics, but yeah, he's a big name creator, just did a massive launch. And he's partnered with a local comic shop that is already set up to do a lot of shipping and fulfillment. He's partnered up with them to receive the books and do the bulk of the fulfillment project. And that was actually sort of a great, win-win to be able to do that, because we know comic shops with COVID and everything else, they've been taking a hit. And so, but they are uniquely set up to be able to do something like this, and have a signing event and other things along with it. So
yeah, that's a brilliant that's a brilliant idea. And in Pittsburgh here, there are several great shops and shops that I'm friends with. So that is an option too. That's something that, again, I'm going to have probably 3 or 4 weeks between the end of the Kickstarter and when things start coming in. And in a lot of ways, that's when I really nail down my fulfillment plan, with specifics of that sort.
Yeah. And it's a big thing. And, I still remember the first Kickstarter campaign that I ran where, so many mistakes in terms of the fulfillment side, 2,000, 3,000 books. Doesn't look that big on a spreadsheet, but when you're talking about hardcovers, you're talking about literally 2 tons worth of books. And I had to drive down to the port of Boston and pick it up in a U-Haul myself because I didn't have my logistics planned out. And so the good news is there's options out there, especially for these big projects. And obviously, a creator of your caliber, your time is definitely not going to be best spent packing and shipping and making trips to the post office. And then one last tip that I'll give is, we use them as a featured resource and a sponsor of this show, is ShipStation, ComixLaunch.com/ShipStation, discount postage, discount printing, and most importantly, batch printing, where you download your Kickstarter survey, you upload it, and it prints them all out in one fell swoop with a couple of clicks. Like, I can't tell you how much time I spent cutting and pasting over the years before finding good tools like that. So, for everybody out there with a big fulfillment project on their hands, definitely check out ShipStation.
I've been very impressed with Kickstarter and the way they sort of have this step-by-step, and resources are available like that. They have lots of information about fulfillment, about every step of this process. I think I said it on Cartoonist Kayfabe early in this process. Working through Kickstarter may be the most professional publishing experience I've had in terms of the amount of information that's clearly presented and available. That part I found really refreshing, because I do a lot of this stuff myself, even though I have experience with a variety of different publishers and, the levels that come with that. I think I am probably more hands-on than your average cartoonist. And so I've gone through a lot of these different steps and processes, and I have found Kickstarter's kind of preparation very refreshing.
Yeah, there's a lot of great resources out there, but it's important to treat it like a project, because project management becomes what this thing is all about, and it's how you turn Kickstarter from this one-off thing to, hey, this is now a new sales channel that's an option for me whenever I have something really cool or innovative to bring to the market. So I'm looking forward to more from you after you survive this one.
Yes.
So, as we're coming to the end here, 20 years in, obviously passion for the medium is still incredibly high and excited. I'm sure this project is going to give you a jolt of enthusiasm and everything, but what else has you, obviously 2020 is going to be, going down in the history books as one of the most bizarre, insane years of all time. But what has you pumped up? What positively about being in this industry, stuff that's coming up, projects from you or others that you're just really thrilled about and are keeping you going?
There's a number of them. One is I'm excited to see how comic shops in the direct market come out of that shutdown that they've experienced. I think that it's made comic shops look at their businesses a little bit differently. Like I said, I have lots of friends. You make comics, you become friends with a lot of retailers. And so I'm always interested in how they run their businesses. And, they're really individual entrepreneurs. We often group them together as the direct market or comic shops.
Yeah.
But man, everyone I've ever gotten to know is very different than every other one. And so I think, I'm curious to see what all of them come up with in terms of how they adjust their businesses. I think they're smart and creative and resourceful. And I think it'll be interesting in terms of the future of comics, what they do, whether it's finding other distribution models. One of the great things with this Kickstarter is the number of stores that have reached out to me, because I don't have a retailer level. I talked to some retailers. It's hard to make that retailer level work exactly. And I got kind of lukewarm responses. So my solution is, one, I plan to go through Diamond. And if that's how stores, want to pick up this book, great, use that. But also I've encouraged them to let me know if you're interested. And as soon as books are available, I will talk, I can deal directly with them. And so it's been interesting to see the retailers that reach out, like to me, that really speaks to them, their commitment to comics.
Yeah.
Obviously they're committed to comics, but that's going above and beyond, where they're like, maybe we'll deal with Cartoonist individually if we think they make something that we want to sell. So that's exciting. And, I continue to follow comics retailers forever. Like, I hope comic shops never go away, and I'll be excited to see like this next iteration of how they adapt and keep going. With that in mind, like part of Kickstarter's appeal to me was trying a new distribution channel. And, Ed is now serializing Red Room on Patreon, which is another one of those. It's another distribution model that really, I think, empowers the cartoonist in a lot of ways. It allows us to be very close to our audience. So that stuff has me excited. And then I would say, finally, in the last several years, the all ages and young adult graphic novels and books have really kind of blown up. And I see a lot of retailers that support and champion that. And I see that as a growth area. And, one, any growth area in comics, I'm going to be excited about.
Yeah.
And two, in the 90s, when I was a reader, like, we really kind of did not attend to that all ages market. Yeah. And we kind of lost a generation, and sales went down. And so I'm excited at the prospect that, like, we are now courting these young readers. If you teach young readers to, if you show them comics are great and you get them excited about comics, they'll take me to my grave, like those young readers now, if they develop a love of comics, that they'll outlive me. So I'm very excited at that. That's a real sign of, I think, health and growth for comics, and something I'm probably most excited about of everything that I've seen in comics in the last decade.
Yeah. And, with a 2-year-old at home, that I am now slowly but surely seeding in comic book mythology before starting to roll in the main superheroes and all that. I know that that's going to be something that I'm looking forward to as well. And so I think comics are definitely the future is always going to be bright, because we are, as you said, adaptable, flexible, boundary pushing, and it's not just one thing. And even if any aspect of the industry takes a hit, pencils aren't going anywhere. Paper's not going anywhere. Digital tools are only getting cooler and better and everything. And so I think the future is bright, Jim, and I'm glad you see it that way as well.
Yeah, I do. And I don't know if I would have always said that. If we had this conversation 10 or 15 years ago, you might have got a different version of me. So I am encouraged by it, and I think it's even beyond cartoonists. Like I said, I think most of the retailers I know are exceptional business people, and I think they have equal creativity and ideas to make this thing better and make this thing, kind of right the ship, so to speak. So I am optimistic.
That's great to hear. Yeah. Angela said we have a comic book store here in Massachusetts, also in Mass. Angela, hey, that you have to call an order and pick up at curbside, right? Yep. So, people are adaptable. I know there's a comic retailer that's literally doing home deliveries. And so, you know what? We are a creative medium. And I think, one of the things that I've actually, chided some of the creators that I work with is that if you only put a little bit of creativity into the marketing and promotional aspect of your stuff, as much or like a fraction of what you put into the actual books, you might see your sales and your audience growth, dramatically increase. And so getting that balance right is absolutely key. But I think we will see coming out of this innovations, because that's just kind of how we as a species evolve, and as an industry we evolve. So it'll be good to see how that comes together. All right, Jim. So I'm going to link up all of the links to the Kickstarter, which is absolutely doing amazing right now for you. Links to the Kayfabe YouTube show. And, let's just end things on a high note. Do you have one last sort of tip for aspiring cartoonists out there who, like yourself, have notebooks full of ideas, but can't seem to commit to getting any one of them to the point where they're ready to actually put it out into the world and start building a fan base based on actually producing stuff versus just coming up with ideas?
Wow. Maybe pick the one that is most doable. Pick one that you can see the end of this week or this day. A 1-page strip, 1 panel a day, something like that. Something that's very like a bite-sized chunk, where you can, get to the end of the week and feel good about what you've done that week because it's manageable. You can do it and start there. Like a 1,000-page graphic novel is still 1 page at a time. So do something small, do something bite-sized, and put it up on your Instagram or on your Facebook page. That experience of just like finishing a piece, even, a 1-page strip, a 1-panel gag, whatever the case may be, is very rewarding in itself. I often say like half of what I learned about making comics, I learned in making the first mini comic I made. And it's terrible. You know what I mean? Nobody's seen it. Yeah. But getting in that like finish it mindset, you will learn so much. Even, it forces you to problem solve just to get to that point of like posting it on your Instagram or whatever. And look, lots of cartoonists talk about you're going to do 1,000 bad pages before you get to where you want to be. So get started on that. Perfection is not really possible in art. And I think that a lot of cartoonists have a certain personality type that is obsessive and that is kind of OCD about, they've got to make it right before they post it. You don't. It'll never be perfect. So do that thing and then plan on making the next one, and focus on that. That's how most of the cartoonists I know work. We don't have perfect pages. What we have are deadlines. Lauren Michaels of Saturday Night Live has often said, we don't go on because we're ready. We go on because it's 11:30. So I like that a lot. And I think it applies, and it's comics, it's fun. It's don't worry about making it perfect. Worry about having fun doing it and make your goal, make it in a 1-week increment.
Love that. Love the narrowing the gap. And there's a quote, perfectionism is a form of procrastination. And
very true.
And so just getting it out there and knowing that the work that you do a year from now and 2 years from now and 5 years from now is going to be better as long as you keep doing it and putting it out there. So I think that's great advice, Jim. And thanks for bringing that to the group. Well, I appreciate your time. I know you're in the middle of a launch, and we know how crazy that can be, but I appreciate you sharing your expertise and insight with the audience here. Thank you so much for taking that time.
Thanks, Tyler. I appreciate it. And thank you to everybody that has backed me so far and everybody that supports Cartoonist Kayfabe. Love you guys. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome, Jim. Well, you have an awesome rest of the day, and we'll talk to everyone else again soon.
Bye.
Bye now.